Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being part of our community. My name is Valon Kolika, and I'll be your host for today. Just a few reminders before we kick off this webinar. If you have issues viewing the stream at any time during the presentation and you're using the web browser version of Teams, please refresh your browser. If you're using the desktop app of Teams, please exit and rejoin. This simply seems to resolve most of the connection issues with our Teams platform. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared publicly. We will post the recordings on our community at aka.ms/security webinars. Closed captions in several languages are available during the live broadcast, and you can enable them by clicking on the CC button located at the lower right corner of your screen. Feel free to ask questions at any time by typing them in the live event Q&A window by clicking on the Ask Question button. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your question anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter it. Now, we often get many questions on these webinars, and we will do our best to respond to all of them in real time. In the event if the answer was not provided, or if you may have additional questions post this event, please don't hesitate to raise them on our Azure Sentinel forum at aka.ms/Azure Sentinel community. We'd love to hear your feedback on how we can improve on these webinars, and you can do so at aka.ms/security webinar feedback. And by the way, all the links that I'm announcing have been already shared with you on the chat or the live event Q&A window here. I would also like to invite you to join our public community by visiting aka.ms/security community. That's the best way to ensure that you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements. On our community, you can speak directly to our engineering teams that create our security products. You'll be able to influence our product designs and get early access to changes by doing things like participating in private previews, which, by the way, you can sign up for at aka.ms/securityprp. In there, you can request features, give feedback, review our product roadmaps, register for events, or join webinars like this. We simply believe that the best way to improve our products is by removing any barriers between you and the people that create them. So we hope you'll join us. In today's session, Javier Soriano, Innocent Wafula, and Jeremy Tan will take us through Azure Sentinel's cost management and how to get the most for your investment. All three, Javier, Innocent, and Jeremy, are program managers with our Azure Sentinel team. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to them.
Right. Thanks, Valon, and thanks everyone for joining us for this webinar today, where we shall be tackling the topic, cost management in Azure Sentinel, getting the most for your investment. Now, we will not surprise you if we say that cybersecurity attacks are increasing in frequency, scope, and impact. Additionally, COVID has helped redefine the traditional boundaries of the network as we knew them. As a result, organizations now have an even greater need to have visibility across their entire digital estate. From a SIEM standpoint, this means that you want to have as much relevant data as possible to support your detection goals. Given that the volume of data is a significant component of the cost of operating a SIEM solution, the challenge then becomes, how do you ensure that you have greater control over your costs, even as your security coverage requirements continue to evolve? With this webinar, we will provide you with the knowledge, tools, and tips to help you achieve your goal of optimizing spend on Azure Sentinel. My name is Innocent, and co-presenting with me today are Javier Soriano and Jeremy Tan. In the backend, we are glad to have our colleagues Benjamin Kovacevic and Vidhi Agrawal, who will be helping us with the Q&A. To cover the topic for today, we will start by giving you a clear understanding of our billing model, calling out the billable and non-billable data sources so you can make informed decisions as you onboard into or continue to use Azure Sentinel. We will then use two examples to further illustrate the pricing model. Moving along, we will highlight some of the offers and benefits that are currently in place to help you optimize your spend. We will then put you in the driver's seat of visibility and control over your costs by showcasing some tools that empower you to do just that. And lastly, we shall share some cool tips and recommendations to help you get the most for your investment in Azure Sentinel. Pricing. Fundamentally, Sentinel is priced on the volume of data ingested. As a cloud-native SIEM, Sentinel is cost-effective in that it helps you sidestep the costs and hassles involved with infrastructure setup, maintenance, engineering, patch management, and the likes, which tend to be significant costs in themselves. Therefore, it is important to take consideration of these costs at the very onset. Additionally, we provide free ingestion of Office 365 audit and Azure activity logs. By default, our billing model is based on pay-as-you-go for data ingested. However, should you be ingesting more than 100 gigabytes a day, then we encourage you to subscribe to the commitment tiers, which help you realize cost savings. With commitment tiers, you could save up to 65% on the Azure Sentinel ingestion cost compared to the pay-as-you-go rate. Now, we have 8 distinct commitment tiers ranging all the way from 100 gigabytes all the way to 5 terabytes, with the 1 terabyte to the 5 terabyte band having been recently introduced. With this, you now get more flexibility and more opportunities for cost savings. We have also recently made significant improvements to the overage billing model. The overage is now no longer billed on the pay-as-you-go rate. So, for example, if you're ingesting 1.2 terabytes a day, the 200 gigabytes over and above the 1 terabyte will be billed at the per GB rate for the 1 TB tier. We will go deeper into this in the upcoming example. What's more, with our commitment tiers, they're pretty flexible. You can upgrade to new commitment tiers anytime. You can downgrade just after the first 31 days. So no annual commitments or inflexible contracts or complicated true-ups, just flexibility and simplicity to help you manage your costs. Now, there are 3 major cost drivers for Azure Sentinel, and these are log analytics ingestion, Azure Sentinel ingestion, and data retention. However, for the sake of completeness, I will also quickly show you the other components which are typically used alongside Azure Sentinel, but whose costs are relatively low compared to those of the key cost drivers. So these are the user entity and behavior analytics, Azure Sentinel notebooks, logic apps, and function apps. So back to the key cost drivers. Log analytics, also known as Azure Monitor ingestion. So this cost is for the proven petabyte scale database to store your data and support high-speed querying requirements that are fundamental to a modern SIEM solution. Azure Sentinel ingestion, this is the actual SIEM value that you get. So the data connectors, detection rules, and investigation capabilities. So rather than being billed as a license, it is built on the volume of data ingested that benefits from the security analytics. For retention, so once the data is in the platform, obviously you want to keep it there for some time. That could be for operational reasons or to comply with regulatory requirements. And there's a charge for that, of course. So let us now look at the non-billable and billable data sources. First off, you already seen that Azure activity logs and Office 365 audit logs are not billable. Additionally, the alerts that are associated with the Microsoft first-party solutions, so things like Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, Azure Defender alerts. So all these alerts that usually create incidents based on the Microsoft security rules that you find in the analytics plate of your Azure Sentinel instance are not billable. However, it's important to make the distinction here between logs and alerts because that's pretty important. So logs are actually the result of continuous collection of events, and these are typically collected at a high frequency. Hence, they end up representing a huge volume in terms of size, whether that's in gigabytes or terabytes. Alerts, on the other hand, are simply a collection of specific events that taken together have some security significance in terms of threat detection. So for this reason, there is actually a significant difference in cost. Now let's look at the billable costs or some of the biller costs associated with our first-party solutions. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Raw Logs are billable. Microsoft Cloud App Security Raw Logs are billable as well, so as Azure AD Sign-in logs and Azure Information Protection logs as well. So for example, if you went to your Azure Sentinel instance and selected the Microsoft 365 Defender connector, if you see anything that's turned on over here in the list of tables, then you're already being charged for it. If it's not turned on and you turn it on in the future, you can expect to be billed for it. For a complete list of the billable and non-billable first-party components or data sources, you can have access to this link. It's going to be shared with you, so you can see what is the full list over there. User entity and behavior analytics. So UBA is actually built on top of the specific tables that you choose to have UBA value on. So for example, Azure audit logs, Azure activity logs, security events, or sign-in logs. So if you select any or all of these tables, then the cost for UBA will be approximately 10% of the cost of the logs you have selected to have UBA value on top of. Notebooks. So Azure Sentinel notebooks are actually powered by virtual machines. And so the number of virtual machines that you would need are basically determine the compute power, and also the number of notebooks that you can run simultaneously will also determine the compute power and eventually the cost. Now, the good thing with VMs is that they are eligible for reserved instance pricing. So anywhere like 1 year or 3 year reserved instance option would give you some cost savings. So obviously, the longer the commitment period, the more significant the discounts you would get. Automation. So automation is based on logic apps and is built on the basis of each action executed in a logical flow, whether that action is successful or not. However, this tends to be one of the smallest costs in your Azure Sentinel bill, and in many cases, you probably won't even notice it. All right, let's take a look at offers and benefits, starting with the Azure Defender for Servers allowance. Now, this offer is based on if you have deployed Azure Defender for servers and use the same workspace for Azure Sentinel, then you qualify for an allowance of up to 500 megabytes per node per day of free data ingested into log analytics for specific tables that have been called out over on the right side there. Now, this from the Sentinel context, the impact of this benefit is most visible when you are using security events and Windows firewall tables as some of the sources that qualify for that benefit. Now, this allowance is not applied to the Azure Sentinel ingestion cost, only to the log analytics cost. Additionally, the 500 megabyte is actually a daily rate average across all the nodes. So even if some machines send 100 MB and others send 800, if the total doesn't exceed the total number of machines multiplied by the allowance of 500 MB, then you won't incur any extra charges. All right, let's look at the second benefit, which is the Microsoft 365 E5 benefit with Sentinel. So customers that have Microsoft 365 E5 SKU qualify for Azure credits for up to 100 megabytes per user per month, again, ingested from specific sources. So Azure Active Directory sign-in and audit logs, Microsoft Cloud App Security, Microsoft Information Protection logs, and Microsoft 365 Advanced Hunting data. These credits are calculated at the end of the month and applied to your bill for the subsequent month. So taking a typical 3,500 seat deployment of Microsoft 365 E5 with Sentinel together, the customers with this profile can see an estimated saving of up to $1,500 a month. Now, this offer is currently valid until the 1st of November 2021. All right, so how do you determine which data sources qualify within your workspace? So to do this, you can actually use a query, and this query will give you back information about the specific tables, give you a breakdown of each of the qualifying tables, what is the amount in megabytes that qualified for this benefit over the past 30 days. And if you want to know the specific total all-up amount, you can also execute this query, and that will give you that specific figure of what is the total amount that actually qualifies. So these are some of the queries that we'll be sharing with you, and Jeremy will be demonstrating a couple of those in a little while. So let's now walk through how we can estimate costs for two scenarios. But first, a quick look at some tools that you have at your disposal for such an exercise. So if you're new to Azure Sentinel, you can take advantage of the free trial. It's 31 days. However, the free part is covering only the Azure Sentinel ingestion cost. So the log analytics cost will still be billable. And if there are any other components of Sentinel or related to Sentinel that you use, such as logic apps or notebooks or machine learning, then those will be billable at the prevailing rates. You can also use the pricing calculator straight from the Azure portal. If you're an existing customer, you can also take advantage of the usage workbook that's already in the portal, gives you a detailed view of your current usage profile. And from that, you can kind of start making decisions, projecting what things would look like if you added more data for particular tables and so on. You can also execute specific queries against your workspace. And as I said, we have a bunch of them in our documentation, and you're welcome to go over there, copy them, run them against your workspace, and get some specific insights around your data sources and their usage. So let's look at this example. So the customer here, the new one, plans to use Azure Sentinel and expects to ingest 100 GB a day and retain that data for 12 months within Log Analytics. Their workspace is currently hosted in the East US region, and therefore that determines the unit price they get for both Log Analytics ingestion and Azure Sentinel. So for Azure Sentinel, the cost would be $2. If they choose to go the pay-as-you-go route, and for Log Analytics, it's going to be $2.3 per GB. So for 100 GB a day, take the two unit prices, and we come up with an estimate of $430 a day. We add in the retention cost, then take out the free 90 days and get a per month estimate of about $15,600. Now, should they choose to go the commitment tier route, which we highly recommend, then this picture is a little different. So for the Azure Sentinel ingestion cost, taking the 100 GB a day tier, the cost now becomes $100 per day for Azure Sentinel. For Log Analytics ingestion, the cost is $196 a day. The two taken together give us $296 a day. And with the retention factored in, we end up with a per month cost of $11,600, which is approximately 25% cheaper, and obviously the one that we would recommend. Right, what's new? So we now have a new capability in the pricing calculator. You cannot just estimate your costs using megabytes. You can also now use events per second. So if that's what you come with to the portal, you can still be accommodated, and we'll be able to give you an estimate on that basis. So let's look at now the second example, an existing customer using the US East region for their Log Analytics workspace, licensed for Microsoft 365 E5 for 25,000 seats, deployed Azure Defender protecting 2,500 nodes in the same workspace as Azure Sentinel, and ingesting 1.2 terabytes a day into both Log Analytics and Azure Sentinel. They have UEBA enabled for security events and Azure Activity, bringing a combined total of 120 GB a day and retaining 3.6 terabytes a month across 12 months in Log Analytics. So that's the scenario summary there. And now let's look at the components we shall need to consider in arriving at an estimate. So first off will be the ingestion cost for both Azure Sentinel and Log Analytics. We'll then go on to calculating the overage. We shall look at the UEBA price, retention, automation, and then take out any benefits or allowances that the customer might qualify for. So let's start with the Azure Sentinel ingestion cost at the 1 terabyte per day tier. So this number comes straight out of the table. So we pick it from there. We begin our mathematics, simply multiply that by the number of days, and we end up with this total. Do pretty much the same thing for the log analytics ingestion. Go back to the table, pick the rate for the 1 TB tier, which is $1,700 a day, multiply that by the 30 days, and we end up with a total of $51,000. Let us now calculate what the overage cost is going to be. So our overage here, by the way, overage means simply the amount of gigabytes that you have ingested over and above the tier. So in this case, 200 megabytes. So what we need to do here now is to establish the unit price at the effective tier rate for 1 terabyte. And here's the difference between how it used to be before, which was the pay-as-you-go billing, but now we are using the effective rate, which should really drive some significant savings for you. So we established that rate, we multiplied by the amount of overage, so in this case 200 GB, and we arrive at the day cost, which is $156. Multiply that by the number of days, and we end up with that total. Again, do the same thing for log analytics, because as you can see from the table, the costs for log analytics are different across the tiers. So for log analytics, we have a different price for the 1 terabyte tier, which is $1,700. Again, we get the unit price there at that effective tier rate. Multiply that again by the 200 GB, which represents our overage amount, and we get the day rate for that. Multiply that by 30 days, we end up with this total. Let's now look at the UEBA. Remember, UEBA is billed at 10% of the data being ingested. So the first thing we need to do is to calculate what is 10% of that data. So in this case, security events with 100 GB gives us, of course, 10 GB. So again, we bring our 10 back, then we get the effective tier rate once again. This is now for Azure Sentinel. This one coming up now is for log analytics. Get the total of the two, which comes to $23 for the day cost, and we then get the total. So for retention, we just simply take the GBs that we are collecting in a day and wish to retain, get the 30-day cost there, and then multiply that by the unit cost per month, and then we get a prorated cost for the month over there. For playbooks, as we said, really a small cost, but if you still need to know, so it's based on the number of incidents per month, multiply that by the playbooks within one incident, and the number of actions that are in a playbook, and then take the cost of each action and then multiply that. In the end, we'll end up with our monthly estimate, which in this case is some $54 odd. All right, so how do we establish the eligibility of data types for the Azure Defender allowance? Again, we have a simple query here that will be available to you. With that query, you can get the breakdown of what the tables are, what the summary is per in GBs for each table, and that can form a basis for your expectations. To establish the total size, again, a similar query at this time returns one number, which is really the all-out total for the same eligibility. All right, so you have done your calculations, you have begun using Sentinel, and suddenly the end of the month has arrived, and as you can fully expect, you will get a bill from Microsoft. Now, what we want to do here is to help clarify the line items in the bill. So the first off that you see down here is under the service name, we have Azure Monitor. So Azure Monitor and Log Analytics are pretty much the same terminology. And the meter here represents the 1 TB tier and its cost. The second is the commitment tier pricing for Azure Sentinel. Again, you see there 1 TB or 100 GB. And the third one is the data retention cost. Fourth one is actually now the overage cost for log analytics. And similarly, the last one is the overage cost for the Sentinel component. All right, so with that, I will turn it over to Javier to help us save some money. So Javier, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Innocent. So let me share my screen. Perfect. So yeah, my name is Javier Soriano, and I'm gonna show you some tips and recommendations to save money when it comes to Azure Sentinel cost. So at the end, the question is, where can I save money, right? Obviously, the first item is ingestion. As Innocent explained, ingestion is the biggest cost component when we're talking about Azure Sentinel cost. So the first thing that we have to do is carefully plan what is going to be sent into the Sentinel workspace. So maybe you have already an existing workspace that your operations team is using. So you need to make sure that everything that is ingested there is going to be used by the SOC. For that, you can also use filtering mechanisms to reduce the ingestion that the data source is producing to just adjust to what the SOC needs. Also, there is an additional tool, which is called the daily cap. So you can set a daily cap of ingestion in your workspace. It can be, for example, like 1 terabyte per day. These we recommend for POC scenarios and testing scenarios where you want to make sure that you don't go over a budget, but it's not recommended for production because indeed, if you hit that daily cap, you will stop the ingestion and therefore you can lose events. Then we have retention. So in terms of retention, there are a couple of techniques. So first of all, you can send the data to other storage platforms that have cheaper storage costs compared to Azure Sentinel retention settings. Also, we can set, instead of increasing the retention days for the whole workspace that we're working with, we can just increase the retention for individual tables. That's also another technique that we can use to reduce our retention costs. Compute, as you probably saw in the slides from Innocent, if you use notebooks in Azure Sentinel, those use Azure Machine Learning, which use at the end compute VMs, basically virtual machines that you spin up in Azure. So if you use those, one recommendation is to obviously shut them down during off hours, and also if they are in a production kind of environment, consider using our reserve instances pricing. Also, there's an option that is very interesting for notebooks and for Azure Machine Learning workspaces, which is setting quotas for the amount of cores and compute that can be used by a workspace. So with that, you can really control how much you're spending at a given time. Another option for these compute VMs using in Azure Machine Learning is to use a specialist queue called low priority virtual machines. Those are cheaper, way cheaper than the standard virtual machines. There's a fourth cost component that is also important where we can save money, which is bandwidth. So when we send data across Azure region, as you may know, you might incur into additional costs. So we're going to review this topic later in the slides. Let's go one by one and going into detail about those tips and recommendations. So we were talking about planning in terms of ingestion. You have probably seen this sentence before. Collection is not detection. So no matter how much you collect, if you're not getting the most out of that data, you're not really getting the value out of it, right? So, for example, if you have to analyze basically your data sources and decide what you really need, what your SOC needs for detection, investigation, hunting, and enrichment of your incidents. We recommend also taking, if possible, a use case-driven approach. So try to decide what are the different security use cases that you want to detect. And given that use case, try to analyze what data sources do I need, what specific filtering do I need to do on that data source to just collect what I need to cover all these different SOC tasks. Also, plan carefully your workspace design. As I was saying before, you might have existing workspaces that were being used by the operational team to collect other types of data. And some of those data streams that were ingested before in that workspace might not be needed by the SOC. If you enable your Azure Sentinel solution on top of that existing workspace, you might be incurring additional Sentinel costs that you don't really need. And that's why the second bullet is important. Consider using a separate workspace for Azure Sentinel. Also, when possible, enable your Azure Defender for servers on the same workspace where you enable Azure Sentinel. That way, you benefit from that 500 megabyte per server per day allowance that Innocent was referring to. The second thing about ingestion, and we talked about filtering, right? Depending on what type of resource you're ingesting from, you might have different options in terms of filtering. So, for example, Azure Diagnostic Settings. This allows you to route different log types to different destinations. depending on whether or not you need it by the SOC or not, right? So for example, AKS, if you go to your AKS cluster and you go to diagnostic settings, you will see there that you have a lot, like 8 or 9 different log types that you can select from. You can, for example, as you can see in the picture, select to just send the metrics related to performance to your operations workspace, but then other log types like audit logs that you need for your security detections, send them to the Sentinel workspace. So that is something that you can do very easily with Azure Diagnostic Settings. In terms of agents, so we have, as of now, 2 different agents that are in GA. The first one is the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, MMA. This agent has been already available for a while. And depending on what server types you have different kinds of filtering that you can do. First of all, for Windows servers, you can set the right level of security event collection that you need. We have 3 tiers right now, all, common, or minimum. So take a look at our documentation, see what event IDs are included in each of these tiers, and select the one that is appropriate for you. In terms of Linux servers, you can set filtering at the syslog facility and severity levels. And if this is not enough in terms of collecting or filtering your workspace, you can also use the syslog daemon in that VM to further filter the logs. Either rsyslog or syslog-ng, both have options to filter, for example, by regex if needed. We also have now a new agent called the Azure Monitor Agent that just went GA, I think, a few days ago. This new agent has a specific control that we call data collection rule. These data collection rules allow very granular routing and filtering of your logs. So for example, in terms of Windows security events filtering, you can specifically say, hey, I want to just collect this specific security events IDs and send them to the workspace. Another set of events, send them to my other workspace, or another set of performance metrics, send them to another workspace, right? As you can see here in the picture as well, we have a Windows server. We choose to send some security events. We can specifically decide which ones we want and send them to your Sentinel workspace because that's what we need for the SOC to do this job. And then the performance metrics that probably the SOC doesn't need as much, they can go straight into my operational workspace. Let's talk now about retention. So as Innocent already explained, Azure Sentinel retention is charged $0.1 per gigabyte per month. And this can become a big portion of the Azure Sentinel cost. So here you see this example, 1.2 terabyte per day, the same one as Innocent was explaining. With 1 year retention, everything in is US. You can see that the ingestion price would be around $89K per month. And the retention, it will already be $33K dollars per month, which is already a big portion of your bill. If you require more than 90 days of retention, first determine if you needed to set it at the whole workspace level or just on table, as I mentioned before. If it's just on table, you might be already saving some money just there. But also, if that's not enough, consider using other storage platforms for long-term retention. And in that, we have several flavors. First of all, Azure Blob Storage. So this is cheaper, definitely, than Azure Sentinel retention cost. The drawback of this option is that it is difficult to query. You can query it, it's still there, the data is query from the KQL commands that we have available, but you have to modify your queries. It can be a little bit cumbersome because you have to select individual files, so not ideal for everyday operation. But this is ideal if you have a specific audit or compliance regulation purposes. So you just need to comply with a specific regulation and you need the logs to be available, but you don't need them to query as often. That's ideal for Azure Blob Storage. You can also use another solution, which is called Azure Data Explorer, or ADX. This is also cheaper than Azure Sentinel retention. And the great advantage of this option is that you can use the same KQL queries that you use in Azure Sentinel. You can still use them to query data that is sitting in Azure Data Explorer without further changing those queries. Not only that, but also we have a feature called ADX Proxy, which allows you to run those queries, those KQL queries, from within the Sentinel instance, but pointing to data that is sitting, that is stored in ADX. For this is ideal for investigation and hunting on that older data that you already put into the longer storage platform. Here you have a couple of architectures that show you how you can utilize Azure Data Explorer in combination with Azure Sentinel to achieve those longer retention savings. In general, you can achieve up to 75% savings on those retention costs using one of these two options. Also important to mention, these options, they can produce those savings, as we mentioned, but they also increase solution complexity and they bring additional management overhead. So when we use, for example, the solution at the bottom, so you have to maintain your event hub, you have to monitor for it, making sure that it doesn't run out of space. So all those things add up to the management that you have to do on this solution. We did, by the way, we have documentation on this, official documentation, and also a webinar that we did some weeks ago on this topic in detail. And lastly, I wanted to touch on bandwidth as well. As we mentioned, sending telemetry from one Azure region to another can incur in bandwidth costs. But important to mention that it only affects Azure VMs that send telemetry across these regions. For example, data sources that are based on the agnostic settings. So for example, an AKS cluster that is in the US and sends the data to a workspace in the EU, those are not affected because it's using the agnostic settings and we already take the hit for that cost and don't push that to the customers. Still, even if it's charged for Azure VMs, it's not a big cost component compared to the ingestion and retention. Just to see an example, we can see 1,000 VMs where each, for example, generates 1 gigabyte per day, and they're sending data from the US to the EU. This would be, so 1,000 VMs times 1 gigabyte per day, 30 days per month, and that $0.05 per gigabyte is the cost of the bandwidth. That would be around $1,500 per month. But if we compare that to the total ingestion that would mean, that ingestion in Sentinel and Log Analytics would be $75K per month. So you can see that is a small cost component. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy to talk about some cost management resources. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you, Javier. I'm going to share my screen. All right, can someone confirm that my screen is visible?
Yes.
Yes.
Cool, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Tan, and I'm based in Sydney, Australia. I'm going to shift the presentation from slides to demo, as I will show you some useful cost management resources. To begin with, we have published a new Azure Sentinel cost and billing documentations. Basically, what Innocent and Javier has mentioned is well documented in these documentations. So in these documentations, for example, you'll be able to find information regarding commitment tiers, costs associated to Azure Sentinel, data retentions, free data sources. And for free data sources, this is very important because, as Innocent highlighted earlier, some of the data connectors actually include both free and paid data types. For example, we have Microsoft 365 Defenders connectors, and that includes the security alerts and security incidents, which are free. But we also have the MDE rollouts, which are payable data source. And another example would be the MCAS connectors, whereby again the security alerts will be free, but the raw data is paid. So here you'll find a screenshot of that MCAS connector. And I will also be showing you later on how to enable the commitment tiers, because just in case some of you are not aware how to enable them. The other thing I would like to go through is also is regarding the ingestions, data ingestions and trending. You can see from here, we have a couple of sample KQL to help you to perform cost analysis. But later on, I'll be showing you some demo and some example on how to use them. Now, scrolling down to this very informational documentation is the screenshots that you guys saw earlier. So this will also showcase how to read the invoice when you receive the bill. All right, so this is the our new documentations. Moving on, as I mentioned, I'll be showing you how to enable the capacity, the commitment tier, which is a rebranding of the capacity reservations, for those of you not aware. Now, I have a new workspace here, which I have turned on Azure Sentinel. To enable commitment tiers, you need to go to settings. So here under the pricing tabs, you have a list of commitment tiers. So you can choose your desired commitment tiers and just hit apply. Now, however, make sure you're aware that commitment tiers is not only available for Azure Sentinel, but also for Log Analytics workspace. Now, how do I enable that? So just go to the workspace settings, and under workspace settings, you can scroll down on the blade and look for usage and estimated costs. So here you see the similar commitment, the list of commitment tiers, whereby you can select your desired commitment tiers. Bear in mind that the number of discounts are actually different between Azure Sentinel and Log Analytics. So make sure you choose the right commitment tiers based on your data ingestions. And earlier on, Javier also mentioned about daily cap. So this is where you set your daily cap if required. But take note that this is only recommended if you are doing a proof of concept or maybe for your test environment. The other thing I would like to mention is the data retentions, because as I mentioned, this is a new workspace that I created. You can see that the default retention is actually 30 days. So Azure Sentinel includes 90 days of free data ingestion. So it's highly recommended to change that to 90 days after you create a new workspace. All right, so I mentioned that a couple of sample query in our new documentations. So just in case you want to refer to more example, the Azure Monitor team actually has published the how to manage usage and cost as well in this particular documentations. So if you scroll down further, you'll find some useful information as well, particularly on some sample KQL queries. So let's say I have a use case to analyze the data volume or the data ingestions by computer. So I can actually refer to the sample KQL over here. So, so this is also quite a useful documentation. Now, since we are talking about KQL, I just want to show you a couple of useful query. So let's say we have a use case to analyze our data ingestions, or maybe, or even the trendings, right, of our data, of our ingestions. So there is a table called usage table. Now this is actually a built-in table. So every time when you provision a Log Analytics workspace, you will get this table. So let's take a look at this table schema. So I can use get schema and I can run this. So there are a couple of columns which will be useful for analyzing ingestions. So first of all, you have heard this word many times in this presentation, which is viewable. So you might be asking, so how do I know, right, which records is actually viewable? So apart from the view, obviously, so you can actually query the raw data and look at which particular records that's been ingested are actually viewable with this particular fields, right? Besides that, under this usage table, you also have quantity column. So this will actually store the amount of ingestions for a particular data type. So there is a column called data type. So this is basically your data source, or in the Log Analytics term, which is your table name, right? So, and then there is also a quantity unit. So by default, this is in MB. So this usage table, the table itself is not viewable. Just for information, that means all the data in this table are not viewable. This data will get ingested hourly based on the amount or the quantity for a specific data type. So let me run that just to showcase how does it looks like. So as you can see, based on the time range that you selected, You find your data types, the ingested amount, whether or not the data is billable, and of course you have the quantity units associated to the ingestion size. So just quickly look through this particular list. You find out that, for example, this Azure Network Analytics _CL data source. So this is actually a data source for traffic analytics. Not sure whether you guys know what's traffic analytics. So basically, this is part of the Network Watcher service where you can enable the energy flow logs. And where you can also specify a workspace for the data to be ingested. So you notice that for traffic analytics, you actually have both billable and non-billable data, and most of them are actually non-billable. So based on this query, I can get these insights. And besides that, so I'm showing you this built-in tables to get the daily ingestions. So to analyze my ingestion and trending, there is also another approach. So let's say I want to know a particular, not only a particular data type, but a particular records, right? I would like to know the volume of that specific records, and also whether or not that records is billable, right? So let me give you one example. So let's say I would like to analyze my security event ID 4624. I would like to know the volumes and the billable size so that I can perform some analytics, let's say. So with that, you notice that these sample queries, there are two columns, which I mentioned earlier. The first one is actually bill size, right? And the other one is billable. The only difference is there is an underscore over here, right? For the is billable, and earlier on under usage is called the quantity for the columns that store the ingestion size. But for individual tables, you will get underscore bill size. So again, this is out-of-box columns or properties that you get on every table. So you can do a summarize and calculate the total of the bill size. And you can also determine whether or not the data type is billable using this underscore is billable column. So if I just run this, I will get the bill size. And by the way, the default the unit of this column is in bytes, right? So this is one of the differences between the usage table. If you still remember, usage table is the quantity units is in megabytes. So from here, I get to see the amount of this particular, the ingestion amount of this particular event ID. And if I were to get the average size per event, right? So this is the total event for this specific time range. So I can, do my maths by dividing the bytes, against the event count, right? So another approach of performing my ingestions analysis. So based on the tables and those properties, you can come up with your own queries. For example, for this one, I'm using the usage table and I'm calculating not only the billable size, but what is the percentage associated to the ingestion size, so that because sometimes it's easier to visualize that in percentage, and I can even plot this in the graph or even a pie chart, for example. And we also mentioned about the Microsoft E5 benefits earlier. So for example, if I want to know what's my ingestions for all the Microsoft E5 benefits eligible tables, I can construct a query that looks like this, where the data types is in all the included or eligible Microsoft E5 benefit table, and I can do a summarize to calculate the total size, and that will give me a nice summary of the ingestion. And then you might be wondering, hey, if I am new to KQL, right? So I might not be able to construct all these queries. So is there an easier way? So later on, I will show you 2 workbooks that we have. So those workbooks will have the similar queries in those workbooks, and that means user just need to open up the workbooks and consume that workbook. So the approach that I'm showing you right now is for user who would like to do like, a deep dive analysis or construct their own custom query. All right, so before I show you the workbook, I would like to show you 2 playbooks or the logic apps related to cost management. So the use case is to notify user, when the ingestion rates, beyond your, let's say your budget, right? So, so we have 2 playbooks. So one is this one is I will call it an existing playbook because this has been published for a couple of months now. So you find this in GitHub. By the way, so all these resources that I'm showing you right now, we'll be providing the links in the deck later. So don't bother to keep track of the URL or or anything like that. So this one is, as I say, this is the existing playbooks. So the purpose is to allow user to set a budget. So I'm not going to show you the playbooks design due to the interest of time, but the couple of useful screenshots, as you can see. So there are a couple of variables in the logic app where you can set let's say this is the budget that you'll be specifying in the playbooks, and after that you set the thresholds for per day, because the budget will actually get divided by the 31 days, and you have to calculate on the daily limit, and once it's exceeded the daily limit, user will get an email notifications informing that, hey, potentially you might be exceeding the budget. So as I said, this is something that we publish for a couple of months now. We do have a new one that we just published this week. So we call it ingestion anomaly alert playbooks. So as the name suggests, this one actually uses anomalies as a logic. So it has, for some of you who are familiar, so we are using the series discomposed anomaly KQL functions to determine whether or not there's any unusual spikes, for example, right? So one of the key differences compared to the previous ones is, we introduce more filterings. So as you can see from the screenshot here, you get to determine the anomaly thresholds. So the anomaly thresholds, so it's actually, we do have a link to this particular functions. So anything that is above 2.5 in terms of the anomaly threshold is considered severe anomalies. But you can set any value as you like based on your observations or tuning. There's also a quantities. So for example, let's say your ingestions on average is, let's say 10 megabytes, right? So that's not very high. So let's say suddenly you have ingestions of 100 megabytes per day, right? So the anomaly score will be high, but in terms of the ingestion is not high, right? It just jumped from 10 to 100 megabytes. So you might not want to get notification just because of that. So you can set your, let's say, what's the minimum spike, right? In terms of size, you want to get notified. Not only that, besides the size, you can also specify the percentage of the increment. So let's say if there's a spike of 50%, right, then I would like to get notified. So this is the enhancements that we have made on the playbooks. So again, as I mentioned, the link will be provided in the deck, which you guys will get a copy after the webinar. Now, I mentioned about the workbooks, right, during the demo of the KQL. So I will talk about two workbooks. Again, one is an existing workbook and the other one will be a new workbook. So let me begin with the existing workbook. So we have a workbook called Workspace Usage Reports. Hopefully most of you have seen this or used it. So this is currently available in Azure Sentinel workbooks menu. So if you go to Azure Sentinel under workbooks, you'll be able to find this particular template called Workspace Usage Reports. So as the name suggests, it will give you the visibility and insights on the workspace usage, which means the ingestions. So here you can see that I have a list of tables or data source based on the size. And we talked about if it's viewable earlier, and this will give you indications whether or not that particular data source is viewable. If you scroll down, you also get to see the trending, which is really handy. And not only that, there is a cost analysis tab, where if you go to cost analysis tab, so by default there is a price estimation for Azure Sentinel. So you can specify the Azure Sentinel price in your regions, so that you will take into the account. As you can see, once you have specified the price, not only you get the ingestion size, but you also will get the estimated price for that particular data source or table. Right, so this is the existing workbooks that we have. We have also released a new workbook this week. So this is actually available, currently available in the Azure Sentinel GitHub. And again, the link will be provided earlier. So the name of the workbook is Azure Sentinel Cost. So basically, it will give you a summary of Azure Sentinel in terms of the cost perspective. There are a couple of parameters, as you can see. You have time range, workspace selections. You also have the ingestion price, similar to what you saw earlier in the previous workbook. But there's also a retention price for you to calculate the retentions. And we mentioned about the Microsoft E5 benefits. So for customers who have the E5 benefits, if they want to know what is the estimate Azure credits they'll be receiving, so they can input the number of E5 seats in their environment, and this workbook will calculate the estimated Azure credit automatically. So let me just scroll down quickly. As you can see, you get the average billable size. You get the total cost, right, based on your ingestions. And something you saw similar to the previous workbook earlier, you get to see a list of a list of data sources, but there's a main difference over here. So over here is not showing you the table name, but instead it's showing you based on the log type. So for example, under the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint raw logs, there are a couple of table names, right? Most of them start with device, right, as a table name. So as you can see here, instead of showing you all of the table names, we actually group them based on the type or the category, so that it's easier for the customer to understand or to consume. apart from that, the retention, remember I mentioned about you can specify the retention costs based on your region. So you will get calculated, the retention cost will get calculated as well. And as for the E5 benefits, so you get to see a list of eligible tables which you have consumed in your environment. And here you get to see the total of the E5 benefit eligible data sources. And because I specified the number of seats over here, so you will also calculate what is the estimate Azure credits based on my ingestion. So even though we mentioned that each user will get 100 megabytes per month, so from there you get to calculate you get to derive your maximum eligible Azure credits. But it also depends on the actual ingestions, right? So if the actual ingestion is obviously lower than the maximum eligible amount, so this will be the actual Azure credits that you'll be getting. So from this workbook, you find that, hey, this is my test environment, obviously. So the total cost is $54, but out of that cost, I get to have my Azure credits of $13, right? Because I have the E5 benefits. Now, lastly, I'd like to talk about the costs for Logic App as well, which is our SOAR components. So let's say you have created a couple of playbooks to be used by Azure Sentinel. You can select them either by selecting the resource groups where your playbooks resides, or you can even select individual Azure Sentinel playbooks. So here we allow customers to specify the execution cost. As you are aware that Logic App is built based on the actions and also the execution, right, of the connector. So so here by default is this is based on the East US region. So is we put the default value of this cost. So this is the cost of the standard connectors. So although there's also enterprise connectors, but this is just the estimations, right? So once you have done all your filtering, you can select the root of the tree, and that will give you the total cost for your SOAR component. All right. So let me go back to the slides. As I said, all the resources we will provide in the link of the resources in the deck. And yeah, so that's all from me. Thanks everyone for joining us today. With that, I hand it over back to you, Balon.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, Javier, and Innocent. This was awesome and amazing work, honestly. It's now we have a place where we can send everybody for the pricing and all those questions, because we'll have a recording of this. So this will be a great resource. So one of the announcements that I shared with you in the live event Q&A is about the second annual hackathon for Azure Sentinel. This hackathon challenges security experts around the globe to build the end-to-end cybersecurity solutions for Azure Sentinel. So we invite you to participate, and for a chance to solve this challenge, win a piece of the 90,000 cash prize pool there is. So hackathon runs from June 21st through October 4th and is open to literally everybody. And in this case, although I think the team did a great job here answering all the questions, but just in case you have additional questions post this event, you can simply go to the Azure Sentinel forum at aka.ms/Azure Sentinel community and post your question there. I want to thank all of you for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.